Going. Got it. And I'm going to mute everybody, but please go ahead. Obviously, our presenters can unmute yourselves, and we'll just keep the noise to a minimum. But we feel free to ask questions. You may ask questions via chat. You may ask directly to our two presenters. So welcome to the final day, happy Halloween of October for the SABR Chicago chapter, Emil Rothe chapter. And I was certainly hoping at this time of year we were going to have a little bit better discussion on the postseason, but that ended a little fast in Chicago. So I'm not sure if our local Dodgers fan is on just yet, but I'm sure he's fairly happy right now. And there's certainly a lot of news in terms of our the White Sox and their management situation. So we maybe can save that for the discussion at the end. We'll open that up because that could probably be a whole hour in its own right there. So welcome. I'm Bill Perch. I'm the newsletter editor for the Chicago chapter, and I'm also the chair of SABR's Publications Marketing Committee. So kind of doing a little bit of double duty here today. So we have two wonderful guests. We're gonna have a little bit of Chicago history to start off with, and then we're going to talk about SABR's most recent publication to come out. So I think it's a great opportunity for both of our speakers to talk, as well as they're both connected on the committee that we're going to lead off with. So our first presenter is Dr. Sharon Hamilton. She's a researcher and writer who's joining us today from up north in Ottawa, Canada, not west of Chicago in Canada. She is the co-chair, along with our other guest, Bill Nowlin, of SABR's New Century Committee, which was formed to celebrate important milestones in baseball history. The committee's inaugural event was a Zoom panel on the August 16th, 1920 fatal beating of Ray Chapman. She has contributed to SABR's Bio Project, as I keep letting people in, she's contributed to SABR's Bio Project and the Black Sox Scandal Committee. So today, Dr. Hamilton will discuss the New Century Committee and explore ideas for celebrating important Chicago baseball anniversaries, as well as Ernest Hemingway and his Chicago baseball connection. So the floor is yours, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Bill. So I was in Chicago actually not that long ago. It feels like a weird, obviously otherworld time. I was in Chicago for the Modern Language Association in January 2019, and last time I was in the city, and it was cold. That's the only time I've been in Chicago in the winter, but I'm a Canadian, so I'm tough, right? So I was able to handle that. I wore my big coat, and I had fantastic food and a fantastic time. I just love Chicago. My hotel was right downtown, and I got to wander around and see Millennium Park and so forth. I mean, it was just fantastic. I really, really like Chicago. So as you said, I'm here for two reasons today. The first one is to talk about the Century Committee. And as you nicely said, this is a brand new committee. Bill and I set it up this summer, actually. It's only existed since June 2020. And as you said, we had our first event in August for the to commemorate the fatal beating of Ray Chapman. If you haven't caught that and you're interested in catching it, it was recorded. It is on the SABR Zoom website, and I do recommend it. It was a really good panel discussion. So the idea behind the Century Committee is that we want to commemorate and celebrate important events in baseball history. And we're concentrating particularly on 100-year anniversaries, but we're absolutely open to other anniversaries, 25-year, 50-year, 75-year. So one of the things I would ask you as a group to think about is, obviously Chicago has a very rich baseball history because you have two great teams. So if there are things that come to mind as things that you would want to celebrate, and these are maybe build events around. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is the way the Century Committee works is a little bit unusual for SABR. We will do things on our own. So the Ray Chapman panel was one that we set up ourselves as a committee. But we also are interested in acting in conjunction with local chapters. So for example, 100 years ago this month, Cleveland won its first World Series championship. And I've been contacted by the Cleveland chapter. They want to put together a panel themselves to celebrate that. And they've worked on it. It'll actually be announced soon in the SABR newsletters, the weekly newsletter. They've asked me as the chair of the Century Committee to come and moderate that panel for them. But they did the rest of the work. They put the panel together, and they're arranging for the marketing and the promotion within Cleveland and through the chapter and also through SABR. So I wanted you also to be aware that we are happy to act in that kind of supportive capacity. So if you think of something in Chicago baseball history you want to celebrate and you want to do it yourself as a chapter, but you'd like our support, that's something we'd be really interested in doing. And the last thing I wanted to mention to you is you do have a very interesting 100th anniversary coming up. So in August 2021, it's going to be the 100th anniversary of the White Sox criminal trial for the throwing of the 1919 World Series. That's maybe not a celebratory occasion, but it's certainly an interesting occasion in baseball history and one that's had a huge legacy in American popular culture. If you think about the book 8 Men Out, the movie 8 Men Out, you've got the novel Shoeless Joe, which by the way, I really recommend if you haven't read it, and the movie that it inspired, Field of Dreams. So that event that took place 100 years ago actually has never really stopped playing out in American popular culture. And I know that there's some interest from SABR's Black Sox Scandal Committee in possibly doing something to commemorate that anniversary next year. And on the Century Committee, we'd be interested in that too. And then obviously I wanted to mention that to you. So really this is just a get your thinking caps on kind of plea, because I think that a lot is possible. And as we now live in this new Zoom existence, it's possible to put together Zoom panels. We could think about a podcast or something. Audio events, there are different options. Oh, and I see someone's asked if we're only doing 100-year events. No, our primary emphasis is on 100 years ago, and that's a little bit of a bias of mine. I'm really interested in history of the 1920s, but the SABR executive have made it really clear, and it's in the description now of our committee, any significant baseball milestone that's coming up for an important anniversary. So 25 years, 75 years, 50 years, and then that opens up a lot of different options, including celebrating things that have happened within living memory, right? So no, not only 100 years. I as I said, I have a bias towards that, but it doesn't have to be only that. So that's really just reiterate that we exist and that we're happy to work with you and that you do have an important anniversary coming up next August. So I'll put aside the Century Committee plug, I guess, and move on to my own. What I said, I'd give you a little bit of a discussion about Ernest Hemingway and Chicago baseball history. And of course, Bill Nowlin and I are chairs of the Century Committee, so we'd be really happy to field questions or comments about that later on in this discussion. So for me, I got into baseball history actually because of my interest in the writer Ernest Hemingway. So I'm sure many of you will be familiar with his work. Old Man and the Sea is still usually assigned at school. And so he remains a fairly well-known figure. And I was invited, my first piece on baseball and Hemingway, which is linked to Chicago, was for this book, Hemingway and Comics, which has just been published by Kent State University Press. And I wrote a small piece for this on Hemingway's superheroes. So when Hemingway was growing up, the superhero comic books didn't exist yet. They did have comic strips in the newspapers, so the jokes, but they didn't have the superhero comic books. Superman hadn't been invented yet, and that wouldn't happen until the 1930s. But I argued in my small essay for this book that Hemingway did have illustrations of superheroes, and they were, in his case, real superheroes. And this is one of the pictures they put in the book. Absolutely fabulous picture. This is a baseball card. You may recognize this is Mordecai Three Finger Brown of the Cubs. And that baseball card is from 1909 to 1911. It's in the Library of Congress collection. And they also published this fantastic photo. That is Christy Matheson, who's a pitcher for the Giants, and Mordecai Brown's real rival. And what I talk about in that essay is that Hemingway was a huge fan of both of these men, both of these pitchers, and they were his real life superheroes. And he did have illustrated pictures of them, drawings, because that was one of the ways that baseball cards were produced. It wasn't just photographs. So after I wrote that piece, I joined SABR. I'm a fairly new SABR member. I just joined this spring. I'm a pandemic joiner. I'd been meaning to join for a long time, and I thought, well, hey, I'm stuck at home. Why am I not joining? So I finally joined after meaning to for a long time. And I've written 2 baseball and Hemingway related pieces for SABR as well. And as Bill mentioned in the introduction to me, so I wrote a piece for the Games Project on the September 4th, 1916 game, which was the final game that Mordecai Brown and Christy Matheson faced off against one another. These 2 great superheroes, as I showed you the picture, that Hemingway loved them both. The game was in Chicago. It's entirely possible that Hemingway went. I have not been able to find proof of that. It would be lovely to find ticket stubs, but he could have been there. The game was not sold out, and he appears to have been in town at the time, and Hemingway would have been 17 years old when that game took place. So it's possible he was there. Regardless of whether or not he attended it, he he would have read about it. I see someone in the chat room has said, I wish A Farewell to Arms was about pictures instead. There are baseball allusions in A Farewell to Arms. It's about soldiers and war in the First World War on the Italian front. But there are baseball allusions. If you're interested, you can go back. There's actually quite a few. And the big baseball book for Hemingway, if you're interested, is actually Old Man and the Sea. There are a lot of DiMaggio references. DiMaggio is, in the book, he shows up as a hero for Santiago, the fisherman who's fighting for 3 days with this fish. And he keeps thinking, if only I could be like the great Joe DiMaggio and have his strength of will, because DiMaggio had been playing through an injury. And so he's actually used as a huge symbol of forbearance and perseverance in the novel. And then the last thing I've written about Hemingway and baseball was a piece that I wrote for the Black Sox Scandal committee this summer on Hemingway's personal reaction to the confessions, the Black Sox Scandal confessions. And this is just over 100 years ago. It happened at the end of September 1920, when you had most famously Shoeless Joe Jackson confessing, but you also had the pitchers Eddie Chiotti and Lefty Williams confessed to the Chicago grand jury that they had in fact colluded with gamblers to throw the 1919 World Series in. And Hemingway was really crushed by that. He had bet on the 1919 White Sox to win. He was apparently a fan of both the Cubs and the White Sox, and I realize that's unusual for fans to split their loyalties today, but it seems to have been less so then, and he certainly admired players on both teams. Anyway, he loved the White Sox, and he was really, really crushed by that, so I wrote a piece about that for the Black Sox Scandal Committee, and I'm planning a follow-up piece for them on his personal reaction to the trial. I mentioned that the trial of the Black Sox players took place in 1921 in August. Hemingway was actually living in Chicago at the time. He lived in Chicago for 18 months between October 1920 and the end of 1921. And so he was actually in town at the time and really disgusted actually that they got let off. He thought they should have been found guilty. So that's coming soon. So anyway, that's a little bit on me and Ernest Hemingway. That's a personal interest of mine. And one of the reasons I wanted to connect with this committee is I'd be really interested to hear from anyone in this chapter who's doing dead ball era research on Chicago teams. Obviously, that's something that I've been looking at through an Ernest Hemingway lens. And maybe offline, we can be in touch and share our passion about baseball in Chicago from that era. So that's it from me.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned upcoming, sort of the continuation of the Black Sox scandal. When I happened to catch up with Jacob Pomrenke at lunch after the Centennial Symposium last year, and there were a few of us around the table, and they're like, you can really have one of these every year for the next couple of years.
You can.
That's really coming from that. And he said, no, he's like, this was enough to pull that off. So we were kind of joking about that, but yeah, I agree. And we're really fortunate, in Chicago, having 2 teams, having extensive histories that we can really go back and document, a lot of the good moments and unfortunately a ton of really bad moments as well. I think that's a great idea. And I think that's certainly something on a chapter level, that's something we can look at and really start embracing and really getting a good sense of that. So perfect. So does anybody have any specific questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. You can still sneak them in the chat if you prefer. I could certainly write that.
Sharon, this is Richard Smiley, and I enjoyed the Chapman Centennial presentation, and I like the concept, and as Bill would know, I'm into all of this stuff and start commemorating. Anybody who knows me knows commemorated anniversaries. When we ran a program back in 2008, which basically was located on the site of the West Side grounds, it was 2007 and it commemorated, and we had it on the day of a Cubs World Series game from 100 years earlier. So we had we had Mordecai Brown's granddaughter, we do a lot of things like this. But I just wanted to know, can we expand this a little? Because one of the other things Bill would know is because I submitted it to our last newsletter. Our last newsletter came out just as we were celebrating a Chicago anniversary of an important baseball game that took place 150 years prior in 1870. I don't know if you're into going backwards too, not just 100, but backwards.
That's a really good question, Richard. And actually, you won't be surprised to know that other members of the 19th Century Committee have reached out to us and have pointed out, as you do, that there are important 150th anniversaries coming up. So yes, the answer. When we formed the committee, we really, well, as I said, I have a bias about the 1920s because it's the era that I really love. So the initial proposal really concentrated on 100, but you're totally right. I think any important anniversary, and in fact, Bill and I have been talking with the 19th Century Committee about things that they will probably do through their own virtual conference next year to celebrate important 150th anniversaries.
Yeah.
But again, if we can support them in their efforts, we'd be, even if that's just through promotion through this, the Century Committee has its own listserv, for example, through SABR, we can help promote. So anyway, yes, I mean, and I think it's a great idea, like you said, to why not? There's so much to celebrate.
Yeah, because I mean, like basically the first professional league started in 1871, and you're just
Exactly
off. The whole decade is just like you said with the Black Sox. If you go 150 off, a lot of historic events going through a whole decade.
Exactly. And I think that's been one of the cool things about forming this committee is it really has gotten people thinking and sending me, certainly and Bill too, excited emails about, oh my goodness, there's, as you say, there's so much we can do. And a lot of it we can do relatively easily. I mean, even just raising awareness. Were you aware that this happened 150 years ago in baseball, or this happened 100 years ago in baseball? And I noticed someone put in also about Landis and the creation of the commissioner's office. Yes, if you have specific ideas about that, that's fascinating. Landis, of course, elected commissioner November 100 years ago this year. So soon, November 12th, I think it was. It's like it's really coming up. And I mean, and I guess his first big action as commissioner is the banning of the 8 players for life, which is coming up too. So yes, absolutely. Anything that you can think of in relation to Landis. I'm also really interested myself in the Lasker plan, which was, as you know, being Chicago people, or you would know if you know this era, Albert Lasker was an ad man. Yeah. And he partly owned the Cubs, right? But it was his ad man skills that he brought to the Lasker plan. He said, we have to save baseball reputation. And so I think something on Albert Lasker and the Lasker plan would be really interesting too.
That would be good. Oh, Sharon, before I sign off, the only other thing I wanted to mention, you said you were in Chicago and you saw Millennium Park. You realize Millennium Park was the site of the White Stockings baseball park in the 1870s for a couple of
I did not know that. Yeah, that's super cool. Thank you.
Yeah, basically where the bean is.
Yeah.
Right there. So
yeah.
Or Cloudgate, the proper name.
Cloudgate, yeah.
But I recognize bean when you say it.
Right. I was gonna say, I'll just go with that. So
that's fantastic. No, I didn't know that. That's really exciting. I'm glad I stood right there.
Perfect. Well, any other questions?
Sharon, this is Tom Cugino here. We corresponded a couple months ago, and I'm happy to be contributing to the first broadcast game, 1921, August of 21, the Pirates and the Phillies. Looking forward to that. And it's amazing thinking about it now in the world we live in of this 24/7 technology, to kind of go back to the infancy of where this all started. Amazing perspective.
Amazing. Tom, great to meet you virtually. And also, I love radio. I mean, it is ancient technology now that we're still using. And so I think that's also really exciting. And the fact that people can still get radio broadcast of games. And actually, a lot of people do audio broadcast of the games through a computer, right? So they're still actually doing radio experience, even if it's through a computer. So anyway, yes, lovely to meet you. And I'm looking forward to that too. I think that's a huge, huge change in baseball because it brought baseball everywhere. So it's sort of the Zoom moment of 1921.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining us today. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Anybody else? I don't see anything else in the chat. So perfect. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And again, at the end, if there's any other questions, we can open up as a free for all. So thank you. So as I mentioned, I'm the newsletter editor for the Chicago chapter. However, this a brand new committee as well. Kind of interesting you mentioned that committee started back in the spring and summer. I am the chair of SABR's new publications marketing committee. And as members, you're probably well aware of the volumes of publications that come out, the passionate research that people put into producing books on a wide range of topics, from individual players to ballparks to eras, classic teams. And I get to welcome SABR board member Bill Nowlin, who is the editor of SABR's most recent publication. It's called Baseball's Biggest Blowout Games. And we'll give it a little bit of a specific Chicago focus because it does encompass all of the teams. And just a quick introduction. So Bill Nowlin was elected as SABR's vice president in 2004. A good year for Red Sox baseball, I believe, and reelected for 5 more terms before stepping down in 2016 when he was elected as director. He has specialized in Red Sox research since he turned to writing and research in the late 1990s and has written, edited, or co-edited more than 75 books and more than 750 articles. Probably the numbers need to go up on that a little bit more. I keep seeing your name coming out on newer ones. And many of those are Red Sox related. Some of them too, SABR 50 at 50, if you have not picked that up yet, as well as his book on Tom Yawkey. He is also one of 3 founders of Rounder Records, one of America's most successful independent record labels. He, as a member of the there you go. A member of the International Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame. He has also traveled widely and visited more than 125 countries to date, and has occasionally taught courses at Boston area universities on baseball and politics and sports writing. And in 2011, he was the winner of the Bob Davids Award, which is SABR's highest honor. So I will turn it over to Bill. Welcome.
In my spare time.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 750 articles or so. I set a new goal for myself about a week ago. I said, okay, I'm going for 1,000. I'm going to try to, I've written over 1,000 articles, but I'm going for 1,000 just for SABR. And I should make it sometime next year.
Okay.
I think this coming March, we can celebrate, the Century Committee can celebrate the first anniversary of SABR's first Zoom gathering. So that'll be a start. But for this book, we do a lot of books, and I see 5 or 6 contributors to various books that are on right now, people that I sometimes have never met in person before, but have contributed to the various books. All the books are free to all SABR members for download, and then you can get them for half price otherwise. But it's a great thing if you have never. I always put in a pitch when I talk to folks here. If you've never contributed to anything for SABR yet in terms of writing something, think of a game, any game. The first game I wrote was just simply the first game I took my son to. There was nothing momentous about it at all. It was actually, I have no idea. I mean, I think the Red Sox won, but other than that, I have to go read about it to find out. It wasn't some spectacular thing. Like, I did go to a game where there were 2 triple plays in the same game, both against the Red Sox, and they won that one. But it wasn't that kind of game. It was just my son's first game, and I just decided to memorialize it. Since my father never wrote up my first game, and I am in the dark. I have no way of ever determining what my first game was. This book, Baseball's Biggest Blowout Games, was I don't know, ideas come along, and the next book out actually is going to be a similar book, also a games project oriented book, baseball's greatest comeback games. So those will be games where all determined mathematically. That blowout games was easier. We simply did it by run differential, 19-0. That's 19 runs between them. So if somebody came up with a game that was 18-1, nope, didn't make it. It has to beat the 19-1 game, 19-0 game to get in there. Pick the top 4 games for each of the 30 franchises, which came to 120 games. And then I added 6 more that were playoff games, just postseason games, just to have some representation for them. But Tom Ruane of RetroSheet has helped with a number of these books in the background. I went to him and said, how do we determine this? And within, I don't know, an hour or two, he had come back to me with a complete list of 700 games that had, were determined by 10 or more runs difference. And so, then I just sorted through them and picked out the top 4 in each category. In a couple of instances, there were ties. So there might have been 2 18-0 games, or an 18-0 and a 19-1 game, which both had 18 runs difference. And so we had to decide between them. What I decided to do is find and talk to different people that I called team captains. One of whom, Bob Webster, is on here right now. He was the team captain for the Chicago Cubs. And the games were pretty much determined by Tom and mathematics. But in a couple instances, we did have ties, and we had to decide, okay, we got to go with one of these 2 games. Which do we pick? And then the team captain, and I'd like Bob to tell us in a minute how he handled working with the Cubs and their biggest blowout games, how he worked on it. He wrote a summary of just a narrative about the Cubs themselves, and then there were the 4 games that he may or may not have been involved in. I don't remember, because there weren't always decisions to be made. Dr. Stephen Boren was the team captain for the White Sox, and last I saw, he's not yet joined us. He said he was going to try to. I hadn't seen him yet. Maybe he has come on. No, I don't think so yet. But if he comes on, we'll certainly want to hear from him. He's a doctor by background. I think he wrote Tommy John's bio, which is an appropriate one for a doctor to write. It was kind of a fun book. I had been to a couple games going both ways. I mean, I've been to games where the Red Sox piled up an awful lot of runs and won, and I've been to games where the Red Sox were crushed. I mentioned in my introduction, there was a woman she sat about 5 rows in front of me. Lib Dooley was her name. Her father, she's got a Red Sox pedigree. Her father was involved with getting the first ballpark, the Huntington Avenue grounds, in 1901. She goes back a ways. 1901. Her father was involved with helping to get the land where what became the Red Sox franchise played its first, 11 years. And I got to know her because she had just been a huge Red Sox fan, gone to thousands of games. And her father had been to every opening day game, I think, for 50, 60 years. And then she went to almost every game. I got season tickets at a certain point, and so I just go down and see her. She was sat in the very front row, right by the Red Sox on deck circle. So all the players got to know her too, kind of. And she always put like a little Snickers bar up on the edge of the, not because it's Halloween, just every game she did this, right on the edge of the thing. And every once in a while, a player would take one and have a little candy before they're at bat. And she was still doing that when I went down and sat with her for a couple of games, and it was a lot of fun. I mentioned her partly because one of the biggest losses the Red Sox ever have, I believe it was the Yankees beat the Red Sox 22-1. She died earlier that day, and so she missed the trauma of that defeat, whatever that's worth. Some people are baseball purists and don't want to see a 29-4 game like when the Red Sox beat the St. Louis Browns in the photo on the cover of the book. The Red Sox were great. I wanted to get a picture of the scoreboard. I couldn't get one from 1950, but they went, it's the same scoreboard. So I know the head groundskeeper, and he set up the scoreboard for me. And I went in and took a picture of it. This was still in pandemic days. This was back in April or so. So, had to get special permission to go in and all that type of stuff. But it was fun to be able to take a photograph of what the scoreboard literally would have looked like back at that time. No advertising on the portion that I took, and everything's really the same. Been renovated, but it's basically the same. But there are people that would rather see a 2-1 game. I just wrote up a 2-1 game from the 1912 World Series for Games Project, and pretty exciting game. There was the 6-6 game that went into the 11th inning and then just ended because of darkness. Game 2 of that same World Series. Those are exciting games. After I think the first 4 games were either tied or within 2 runs, and one of the writers for one of the newspapers said, if this series goes on like this, the New York Giants and Red Sox fans are going to have to find sanitariums in their cities, because it's just so nerve-wracking to go through. It's not a nerve-wracking experience to go to a 29-4 game, depending. I mean, you might want to leave if you're the team that's losing, or stick out and see something amazingly miraculous happens to make it into the comeback games book. I was at one of the greatest comeback games in Red Sox history. They were down 7 or 8 runs in the 9th inning and 2 outs and came back and won the game. And that was quite a game. This 29-4 win over the Browns happened the day after the Red Sox beat the Browns 20-4. So in back-to-back games, they were 49-8. It was a kind of an unbelievable stretch. It's been great. I've really enjoyed working with a lot of authors. I see, I think Ken Carrano's here, Gary Belleville, Bob Wood. I saw your names all on the chat, and each of you contributed to this game. Maybe you might want to say something about the game you wrote up, but let's go to Bob Webster first and tell us about working on the Cubs. And you wrote up one or more of the Cubs games too.
Hi, I'm Bob Webster. I grew up in Michigan City, Indiana, about 55 miles from downtown Chicago. Oh yeah, first I want to apologize for the lighting. I'm not trying to hide my identity, but I'm in the process of moving, and my computer is sitting on a card table in my dining room today. You can't see me very
You're
well.
fine.
Well, anyway, so I've been a Cubs fan since '63. In 1980, I moved out to Portland, Oregon, but I've still remained a diehard Cubs fan. And I did write one of the blowout games from 1906. The Cubs beat, who did they beat? The Giants, 19-0. Bill asked me to write the introduction. Okay. Then I found out I'm going to write 144-year history of the Cubs in half. That's going to be interesting. So yeah, this was great. There were about 5 SABR projects I did in a row that were all from the early 1900s. So when I was digging through old newspapers for one of them, I would find stuff that I needed for another. And the timing was great because I was also working on Joe Tinker's biography, and a lot of information ended up in both of these articles. So that was really good. Then also Don had a book on the White Sox, and at the same time I was working on history of Comiskey Park. So this was great. I loved it. So yeah, these blowouts, I know a lot of the game stories, we try to stay away from the play-by-play, but that's the main attraction for what happened in these games. So we need to find out how they scored 19 runs against the Giants. So a little more detail on the games. I don't know what else you want to hear. So anybody have any questions? Or?
Did you have any difficulty researching that game from 1906?
One difficulty was looking in the Chicago Tribune for the Cubs. You don't see the word Cubs. All you see is Chicago and sometimes National League. And then try to search for Chicago. Yeah, you get about 1 million. Yeah, so that is difficulty. Back then, they did not use team nicknames in the newspaper.
Sometimes when I hit a situation like that, I try to pick out a player's name that was somewhat prominent in the game, and hopefully they have a name other than Smith.
Yeah, luckily for a game like this, you know, I have the date of the game, so I just looked in the next day's paper, and I looked in the New York papers along with Chicago to get different views.
There was no YouTube video from 1906.
No. That is true.
No radio archives either.
It's just funny though you mentioned about that. Some of the research I've done has been from that era. So I've been running into that where it's Chicago Nationals, Chicago Americans. And it's funny what Bill said, the first true bio that I wrote was Forrest Smith from that era. And I wanted to stop halfway through it. I'm like, this is impossible. So
after I started writing a bunch of bios, I came across John Smith. And I thought, okay, there's a challenge.
yeah.
And it was, but I got lucky real early on. I found an obituary for him, and he had a daughter named Thelma, which is a much less common name, and she was still alive. He had ended up playing, he played for the Red Sox in the 20s, but then joined the Internal Revenue Service and lived in the Washington area. And I was able to find her, and she was able to give me a bunch of information that helped. So you never know what you might find if you get lucky.
Excellent.
With writing biographies, I found out looking for obituaries, that's where you're going to get some good information of family members and the correct spelling of their names. That's a good place to go for info.
There are some people that prefer writing about those who are deceased, partly because you do have the access to the obituary. If you're writing about a living player, I think you got to be compelled to try to find them and interview them. And that would scare off a lot of people that would be too timid to try to, first of all, it's not always that easy to locate a former ball player. They don't necessarily want to be located that readily. Depending on the era, the further back you go, the easier it is to find them. But I mean, I don't think it'd be too easy to find Barry Bonds' phone number, for instance, if you wanted to try to look him up.
Yep.
You don't actually need to in his case, but so how about Gary? Do you want to talk about the game you wrote up at all?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I came late to this project. I had started writing for the Games project in 2016, and I wasn't even aware how to get involved in these projects at the time. And Bill had some difficulty getting writers for the Seattle Mariners games, and I live in Victoria, British Columbia. So he sent an email out to the Pacific Northwest chapter, and I was very excited to receive it. And I hopped on board and wrote a couple of the Mariners games. And it was a little intimidating to start, not being a Mariners fan, although I did jump on the Mariners bandwagon in '95 when they had their big run. And I did go down to Seattle for the ALDS against the Yankees, where they had their big comeback. And so I wasn't starting from square one in my knowledge, but I was a little worried about not having the background that I have for writing about the Montreal Expos. So I just upped my research and spent a few more hours. And I was really pleased with the research that had already been done by SABR. It really gave me a leg up. So for instance, the Seattle Mariners ownership history was really, really useful in getting me up and running really quickly. I had two games. One was 95, I believe, and the other was 2001. And it was an interesting bookend of the Seattle Mariners glory years. So when I write my Games Projects articles, I like to stay away from the play-by-play and spend more time putting the game in a historical context. So I was able to do research on the team that they had built around the '95 season. I think A-Rod was 2 weeks away from making his major league debut when the blowout game happened. And at the end there, the 2001 game, the Mariners team was a veteran ball club, and Pat Gillick had really done some amazing work in the off season before the 2001 year. He brought Ichiro over and signed Brett Boone to a free agent contract. So I found that really interesting in looking at the Mariners team just before they had their big breakthrough, and then right at the end when they had their 116 win season. Anything else, Bill, I should cover?
No, not really. Let's go back to Chicago. Bob Wood, can you tell us about the game you wrote up? It was an away game. Obviously, some of the games are home games, some of the games are away games. So this was a White Sox victory, 29-6.
That was in, it was against the Athletics after they had just relocated. And it was in Municipal Stadium, which was proved to be a launching pad early on for lots of home runs. And Sherman Lauer had a wonderful game. He led off twice innings with home runs. And what I found the most interesting, though, was that the home plate umpire was Eddie Rommel, who used to pitch for the Athletics in Philadelphia. And Rommel had been the starting pitcher in a game back in 1930 where they lost to Cleveland by giving up 23-5 or something like that. It was just an awful lot of fun to research it and then to talk about, like Gary said, to talk about the team and the ball players much more than the play-by-play. And it's always interesting to see how did they get there. Lou Boudreau was the manager at that time. And of course, then he ended up here, of course, with the Chicago influence to begin with, born in Harvey. And so again, it's just all part of history, and which makes it so interesting.
Actually, a question came to my mind I hadn't thought about before. Now that we have interleague play, and there have been games between the White Sox and the Cubs, have any of them been significantly one-sided? Does anybody know?
Yes, but not to that degree. I mean, we've had some that have gone like, I think almost double digits. I mean, we had one where, the Sox blew out the Cubs this year at Wrigley with John Lester pitching, and it was like just a ton of homers. And I think that might have ended something like 11-2 or 12-2. And I think that's kind of at the extreme end. I think there was a Cubs victory that was probably the biggest margin. It might have been 11. So it's something like that, but it's not like these games where it's close to 20.
Right. So there's another question we could talk about a little later here. What's John Lester's future? We can come back to that in a minute.
That's big news. Yeah.
Well, I thought he was going back to you guys, Bill. Don't you want him?
I don't know which teams want to put up big money for anybody right now.
Yeah. I was going to say at a cheaper rate. We'll take him back at a cheaper rate. So
yeah, for the major league minimum, take him back.
Yeah. Actually, there was one quick question that popped up right now. Are these games only MLB? Yes, for this particular project.
Only Major League Baseball games, and only from 1901 to the present. There are no 19th century games in here. We decided to limit it mainly because RetroSheet doesn't have data. They don't have very good data going back to the 19th century. We wanted to try to get pretty decent coverage.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably some neighborhood games that we played in, some of us, which were a little more lopsided, but
sure.
They usually had mercy rules though, so those got over with sooner.
Right.
I had over a 900 batting average when I was a kid growing up, but that's because we didn't count errors.
Right.
The error was a base hit, since everybody made errors on every play. 900 average wasn't that hard.
Yeah. There was another question that popped up for a future book. Are you considering looking at games from the Negro Leagues or the Women's League?
Well, I don't know if there'll be a follow-up to this particular book, but there will be certainly other opportunities to look for games for some of these. I did have a section in here. Did I not? Yeah, I wrote a chapter called Blowout Games in the Negro Leagues. That because I wanted to have some representation. I didn't cover women's professional baseball, but I did write this brief chapter mainly what happened is I heard about this event that occurred where there were 2 blowout no hitters in one double header. I mean, it's sort of unbelievable to have. Let me see if I can actually even pin it down. Okay, Asheville, yeah, June 9th, 1946. So it's after the war. Things were getting back to normal. The Asheville, North Carolina Blues took 2 games from the Montgomery, Alabama Dodgers. June 9th, 1946. Asheville won the first game 24-0. They won the second game 22-0. That was both games were reported as no hitters. They were reported as no hitters, but we couldn't find any box scores for the games. The June 10th Asheville Citizen said their moundsmen pitched 2 no-hit, no-run games. The Asheville NC Blues took both ends of a doubleheader with the Montgomery, Alabama Dodgers at Keystone Field here Sunday afternoon. So it was a home game anyhow. That was good because when I'd be sitting through a doubleheader and lose 46-0. Yeah.
You might demand your money back on that one.
Yeah. Maybe minor league baseball, and I don't know about Negro League baseball, but many parks would give you a free ticket to a future game if something like that happened.
Our condolences.
Yeah. Actually, there was an interesting game that happened when it was in 2019. There was a game that the Red Sox were playing Kansas City, and the game had to get called, had to stop for some, I guess it started raining. Yeah, and it was tied. It was in the extra innings. And the game was tied, and so they had to suspend it. And everybody got to where they wanted to go for the next day's game. The umpires had to go in the morning instead of that night onto their next assignment. But they got together again. For some reason, instead of just declaring it a tie and leaving it alone, Kansas City flew all the way back to Boston to play the game as the first game of a 2-game set. The other thing was another team, but later in the season. And, I thought to myself, okay, now this could last a total of 4 batters. That's all it would take to win this game was 4 batters. Mm-hmm. Kansas City, being the visiting team, makes outs in the top of the 16th inning or whatever it was. 1, 2, 3, first Red Sox batter hits a home run, the game's over. It actually took 6 batters. And Kansas City made their outs, and the Red Sox did come by and win. And it was probably the shortest game that a lot of people had ever seen. The Red Sox knew they were going to have a hard time getting people to come to the game. So they offered anybody that was, I think, 16 or under could come for free if they had a parent with them. And the tickets for the parents were discounted to $5 each or something. It was really interesting. They packed the ballpark, and a lot of the kids were much, much younger than that. And in some of the interviews afterwards, some of the parents said, did you feel robbed? Well, it's free, but did you feel robbed that you didn't get to see 4 or 5 innings anyhow? And some of them said, "I'm not know if my kids would have had patience to sit through 2 or 3 innings." Anyway, I wrote that up for a games project because it was just so much fun. But in and out, I think it was like 11 or 12 minutes that the game took. These games take a long time these days.
Yeah, things have changed that way. That's for sure. So.
Well, I'm lucky to get out of there in 3.5 hours from a Red Sox game these days.
Right. Perfect. Well, any questions? I didn't see any in the chat. Bill? Feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Bill, have you ever considered doing a project like with not blowout games, but blowout innings, like innings where, like there can't be too many of them where one team scores, let's say 10 runs or more, just to see how, because
yeah. It would be, I don't think that, well, I suppose you could stretch a book out of it. We get so many ideas for books these days that we're not, we've got, like, next year is booked, and have taken applications for 2022. They're having a meeting week after next to try to set out that schedule because obviously it takes a year or so to put one of these things together. That would be interesting to research for a games project article, certainly. I don't know if it would make a book, but you could get together, if you wanted to do it, you could get together with 3 or 4 friends and just pull something together. And SABR will feature it to some degree. It would be interesting to find out the biggest innings of that sort in baseball history.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I saw this book, I went and I looked in the Red Sox section because I'm a Red Sox fan. Looking for a particular game, but it's not in there. But I remember it was actually probably their biggest blowout after one inning. It was back in 2003, and they scored 14 runs in the first inning.
10 of those runs before they made the first out.
and their leadoff hitter Johnny Damon had 3 hits. But one thing I forgot, I just went and looked at it. I forgot he actually had a single, a double, and a triple. So
right,
he
for
was
the cycle.
3/4 of the way to the cycle before the end of the first inning.
Yeah. You can imagine, sometimes people do show up for games late. Imagine showing up for a game like the beginning of the second inning and 14-0, what?
Yeah.
It was, sorry, a couple of years ago, I want to say it was 2017. For some reason, that's the date I have in my head, but I wasn't at the game. I was just at home, and I was running around doing some errands, and I grabbed my phone and pulled up the MLB app, and the Pirates had scored 10 runs against the Cubs in the first inning. And I kept thinking, I'm like, well, clearly the app, they made a mistake. It's 1-0, or, you know, it was a 1 or a 0. And I turned on the TV. I'm like, nope, I guess my day is free.
Yeah.
I don't need to continue that.
How about that Dodgers Braves playoff game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't they also have 12 runs in the first inning?
I think so.
Yeah, there were a couple of games just this year, asterisk year or not, there were a couple of games this year that would have edged into the book if the book hadn't already been out.
Yeah. It's all about timing on that.
Yeah. They blew it.
Actually, one comment here was wondering what the highest combined scores in a blowout game might have been.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that right off. The biggest one was 30-3. That's that game. So that's a 27 run differential, but obviously that's only 33 total. Whereas the one on the cover of the book, the 29-4 game, was also 33 runs total. I don't know. There's only 126 games here, but
the Braves won this year 29-9, so that would be 38.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a request for a SABR book about the 1984 Cubs. That was not by me. They said that that's their favorite team, and they would read the whole book up until the last chapter.
How about organizing a book like that?
Yeah,
that would be. You've got a few Cubs fans on here, and there are plenty of other Cubs fans one could reach out to through the SABR directory and through that kind of thing. I mean, a book like that. What we try to make sure is that we're doing new research. So if somebody wanted to write a book on the 1927 Yankees, no, because almost all those bios have already been written. So we wouldn't be stimulating new research. It would just be kind of telling a story that has already been told to some extent. But the 1984 Cubs might make it. I mean, that the more towards the present day you are, the fewer bios tend to have been written per team. So a combination of biographies and remarkable games from that season could make for a good book. We haven't had a Cubs book yet in this series, I don't think. So somebody wanted to look it up. You just look up each player one at a time. You can see if they have a bio written or not. That's how I do it. Just go through the roster one time. Yes, game bio written, yet no bio not written. And but then you got to find people to help write it. It could become a chapter project, or a half a chapter project in the case of the Chicago chapter, but yeah.
Well, I know one of our guests who's online today wrote the bio of Bobby Dernier. So we've got a head start on that particular project. And Lorraine offered up that she has all the newspapers from the last month. She kept all of those. So just a general question for you about these projects, in particular the book projects. How does the process work? Really from inception to final publication, the steps that you go through as an editor or as a contributor writer.
I see Ken Carrano's on the chat here too, and he wrote a couple of the blowouts. He was the Kansas City Royals team captain, and he wrote up one of the games as well. Why don't we pause for a moment? If you want to maybe share a little bit about your experience in working on this particular book.
Sure. I came a little bit late to the project too, but it was a lot of fun to write up this game. It was a pretty meaningless game in the whole scheme of things. September of 2004, a lousy Royals team playing a slightly less lousy Tigers team, playing out the string, and it had one of those innings that Richard was speaking about. In the third inning with the Royals were already up 6-2 going into the third, and they came out at the top of the third winning 17-2 with an 11 run inning in the third. The highlight of that inning, or low light as that might be, was a young man by the name of Lino Ernadetta, who made his major league debut for the Tigers. And walked the first batter he hit or faced, and they gave up hits to the next 5 and was mercifully removed at that point, becoming, I want to say, the 75th, 76th major leaguer not to record an out in his first outing, or in his outing. And then he managed to record his first out 3 years later for the Mets. So he was actually able to retire somebody. There was a major league record, American League record set in my game. Joe Randus scored 6 runs, going 6 for 7 with a double and 5 singles, and he scored 6 runs, the first American leaguer to score 6 runs in a game. And the Royals set their team record for most runs in a doubleheader with 26, and that record was set in the first game, which was good because they were shut out in the second game of the doubleheader, 8-0 by the Tigers. So it was a day of extremes for the Royals. But it was a lot of fun to write up this game. It's the games project and writing some of the books and things that Bill is so excellently edits is just a lot of fun and a really good way to get involved.
So Bill, remind me again what it was you were asking me about. Sorry.
Yeah, basically the process that you go through, because I know some of us have contributed to writing bios or contributing to a book project, a games project, whatever it might be. But something just generally, what's the process like from the initial idea for a book through getting it published, finding writers, contributors to that? How would that work?
Well, it differs from book to book, of course. There's a group of us that have done a number of these. So you will find, I think, every single book that we've put out recently has been edited by Len Levin. He is a retired newspaper copy editor. He worked for the Providence Journal for several decades. And he's just excellent at doing copy editing. He does most of the games project, just regular day in, day out games project articles too. Every day he's probably doing 3 or 4 articles, editing them for SABR, and he's amazing. Carl Reachers has been the fact checker on a number of recent books that I've worked on. And I just have so much respect for fact checkers. It's rare that I have written a piece that didn't have a fact wrong. Maybe I'm too lazy or something. I don't know, getting on to the next one. But if I get away with only having 1 or 2 errors that he finds, I find myself thinking, oh, I didn't do too bad on that one. I've seen some other things come through where people have 15 or 20 errors wrong, but I've had 4 or 5 of them. And I just had one last week. I had 4 or 5 things that he picked out, said, check this out, this out. It's good to have a team of people behind you. If you've never written one yet, I think you'll find that most of the people will be supportive of you. We don't want to turn people off by saying things like, you stupid idiot, didn't you know that, so-and-so was right-handed? That's not going to really encourage people to become favorite contributors. So, I think people have been, we wouldn't keep working with somebody that was coming across too supercilious in some fashion, but I don't know. It's really been fun working with a lot of different people, a lot of different writers. Some people are so energetic and anxious, interested to participate that we tend to have an informal 3-item limit. So a game like this, a book like this that has 120 games and 126 with the postseason games, I don't think there's anybody that wrote more than 3 games, because I try to cut people off, including myself, from taking on too many games at once. The better to bring more people in. I like to find first-time writers that have never written before, and to try to get them hooked the way I got hooked myself at some point in the past. But the process, each piece goes through at least 3 rounds of editing, sometimes 4. Sometimes, like the Jackie Robinson book that's coming out in the springtime in March, there's a co-editor on that one, Glenn Sparks, that I work on. And so usually what happens is people contribute an article, send it in to me, and I look it over to see that everything that looks like it should have a footnote has one, that the footnotes make sense. If there's a link provided, I'll check the link and see. And I mean, I just had one yesterday that came in and the link didn't work. So it wasn't really a functioning endnote. He had left extra space in there. And when he realized what happened, he just condensed the endnote, and then it did work. But that's kind of an initial vetting process that things go through. If I see, somebody, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, people misspell his first name a lot. And so but I'll catch things like that I can. It's the fact checker's job, though. In the second round of editing, I'll do whatever I could do, send it back to the author. Then he or she makes the changes, sends it back to me, and then I'll send it on to the fact checker. I'm kind of like the logistical gatekeeper. I shuttle things back and forth. I kind of enjoy that. A day that comes through that I don't have 5 or 6 items that I'm moving from one person to another is kind of a disappointing day. I like the activity. So I will send it on to the fact checker, and then they'll do their work. Might take them, sometimes they come back the same day, sometimes might come back a few days later. Len has such a huge backlog that we have never been late with a book, but he might take 6 months to do the final copy editing. Some of you as authors may have experienced a delay at that stage of the game, just because he's doing so many other things. I mean, I've got some piece of mine I sent him in April that hasn't come back yet, but it's for a book that's further in the future. So he's focusing on getting the ones done that need to be done now. And that makes perfect sense to me. But it's been a nice team. There's different people have come and gone as editors. I don't edit all the books, co-editors, fact checkers, and so forth, and certainly writers. It's just, I don't know, again, if you've never written one, think about it. It doesn't have to be for a book. Get your feet wet just doing a regular game. I wrote up a game this year. I wrote up 2 games from this season. Opening day, home opening day for Boston, just because it's such sort of a novelty to have home opener on July 24th. And then I wrote up the game where the Red Sox were playing Toronto, and because the Toronto Blue Jays couldn't cross the border and other teams couldn't go back and forth across the border, they played all their home games in Buffalo. So I had already done some research in the past, and I knew that the Red Sox had not played in a game in Buffalo since 1917, I think it was. They played 4 times. They played exhibition games against the Buffalo Bisons, but they were all between 1903 and 1917. So here, all right, the Red Sox are going to play a Major League Baseball game in Buffalo, New York. And I was fortunate to get credentials for the game. So I drove 9 hours nonstop. Well, I stopped to get some gas, but 9 hours out to Buffalo, stayed overnight, watched the game, and then drove back again. And I wrote that game up. It was very interesting experience. You can't go wandering around baseball games and baseball ballparks during pandemic days. I mean, I had my mask on, and you were told this where your assigned seat is. It's distanced from the other seats that the other media people had. This is the way you go there. Somebody actually personally escorted me up these steps to the right, up another set of steps. That's your seat. The men's room is back there. There's some food over there. Don't go wandering around the ballpark. And so that's what I did. I went to the men's room, got some food, watched the game, and left. No, I mean, the interviews with the players are all by Zoom, not down in the clubhouse and so forth. So I really didn't get a feeling for the ballpark other than just looking at a sense of what it looked like from one perspective. A bunch of cardboard people, I could see the back of their head in front of me in some of the seats down below. Yeah, they don't look the same they all kind of look the same from behind. They didn't have photographs of the back of the people involved.
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. You could still send it through the chat if you'd prefer. I was going to say one of my comments. Sorry, I saw that just pop up. One of the comments when I first heard about this book coming out, I'm thinking, I've seen a lot of blowouts with the Cubs. I'm just kind of curious if I had any connection to it. And obviously, the Cubs games were fairly old.
Yeah.
But the 1995 game. Funny story. That was the summer after I had finished college, and I was working 3 different jobs, and I had a midnight shift that was a customer service job. And we were kind of going back and forth because the vending machine was down the hall from where we worked. And I was like, wow, the Cubs are pounding the Rockies. And so what we did is because the system that we had used to call us directly when a call would come in, and then you would just go, we unhooked our headphones, set our volumes on our phone really loud, and we would just run back and forth because that game was so exciting just with a high score. So it was kind of interesting. I'm like, I did have a connection to one of those games. So, so any other questions?
I had one other thing somebody had a question. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Bob, it looked like you unmuted yourself.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Rich. I am interested a little bit more in the background on this marketing committee. If you could give us a little, what the impetus was for that, and how is this, different from what was going on before?
Sure. Bill Perch.
Yeah, I was going to say, which Bill?
Recruit him.
Yeah, so the idea came up that to create more energy around the publications that come out, because if you've noticed really over the last couple of years, the number of books that have come out has just exploded, and it's fantastic information. So the way that it actually started, I forget the time frame. It might have been at the end of 2019, early 2020, but Bill Nowlin sent an email out and just did a search on some people with marketing and communications as a background, and we just started this initial discussion that SABR can really use that to really start promoting these particular projects, because there's so many aspects to what SABR is and what they do. So that's where it really came into play, of bringing people together that had marketing to start reaching out outside of just some of the traditional ways that we've been promoting these publications. So because if you've contributed to any of these books, the time and effort that goes into it. Again, everything that Bill and some of the other people had mentioned of digging through old newspapers, if it's an older book, scheduling interviews with other people. And we really wanted to shine a spotlight on these efforts and get people talking about it on a much bigger scale. So yeah, that was really sort of the background to it.
But Rich, if you might be interested in joining the committee, let us know. We do want to, we've started off trying to publicize the publications, but the goal overall is to attract attention to SABR, to help with just membership in general, not just the publications.
Yeah.
Does SABR have a marketing officer that's on staff, or is this just all?
There's only 4 people on the staff, but no. So we're volunteering to try to help in that regard.
Yeah, I think we still have got, issues where, if you go to a Cubs game, even for some, regular season ticket holders, how many of them have any knowledge of SABR? I think it's probably pretty low. And yeah, how do we tap into that better?
If they would just let us control the scoreboard for an inning, we could really give them a lot of
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Well, but I agree. That's one of the challenges that we talk about within our chapter, as well as the marketing committee, that with SABR, sometimes it's easy to think of just the analytics side.
Right.
That it's a bunch of number crunching. And if you have not read 50 at 50, I think that does give a really good snapshot of the entire organization's history of the different ways that SABR works. I mean, there are analytics in there, but it's historic research. It's little intricacies of the game. Keith Olbermann's article about why the shortstop is 6. You know, it's a whole range of, there's a whole range of experiences with SABR. One of our newsletters, our chapter newsletters from last year, I forget the date on it, Jason Schwartz from the baseball card committee interviewed Mark Armour. And the comment was, you know, what is SABR? And his response was, however you like the game, there are other people in SABR that way. If you just want to follow your local team, that's great. If you want to do number crunching and come up with new analytics, that's SABR. If you want to just talk about old games and document them, that's SABR as well. So yeah, so that's one of, I agree. That's one of the challenges that SABR overall has.
You got us sold.
Yeah. Let me just sort of end with one thing here, which crossed my mind. I did a talk with another chapter about a week or so ago about this book, and somebody asked if there was, I think they might have been wondering if at the beginning or end of seasons, teams sort of slacked off or weren't up to speed yet, and had asked if there was a situation where, you know, maybe in September there were more blowout games, maybe because they're bringing up guys from the minors and they're already in 8th place. Well, it can't be in 8th place anymore, but you know what I mean. And no, there wasn't. There was quite a spread. There were 20 of the games were from April, 14 were from May, 20 were from June, 23 were from July, 18 were from August, 21 were from September. And they're scattering October games in there just by circumstance. But the really remarkable thing that jumped out to me was May 20th. For no reason at all that anybody can determine, out of the 120 games here, 4 of them were on May 20th, which is, it doesn't make any sense at all. 2 of them were on the same day, May 20th, 1994, Seattle 19, Texas 2. And the same day, Minnesota Twins 21, Red Sox 2. Then 2 years later, also on May 20th, 1996, Braves beat the Cubs 18-1 in Atlanta. And the Diamondbacks beat the Braves. How could that be? That's got to be an error there. I got to check this one out. Diamondbacks beat somebody 13-0 in Phoenix. It says they beat the Braves, but the Braves can't be playing at the same place twice at the same time. So I think I just spotted an error.
Or that might explain the losses.
What?
That might explain the losses, the big loss, if they had to be 2 places at once.
Yeah, that could explain it. They sent the vendors to the play.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. I gotta.
Bill, are you suggesting for May 20th, 2021, we bet the over?
Yeah, I guess. Something going on that day.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well,
any other questions? Perfect.
Can I ask a question about downloading the titles? This is Marlene. So I, a while back, tried to do it and I can't remember what trouble I had. I use Overdrive on my iPad as my e-reader, which is a interface to public library digital books. And I don't think whatever I tried didn't work. What do you guys use when you download these titles? Do you download them to your iPad or to your computer? I'm very curious.
I can, I have, oh, I was sorry, Bill.
Wait.
It was my mistake. It's not a mistake in the book. I just want to reassure everybody.
We're good. We're good.
One was 1996 and the other was 2006. So And it was the Braves in both cases. Okay, now.
I was
He
just
can
gonna
sleep now.
I was gonna respond to Marlene because Marlene, I have been downloading the books on my iPad as well. I have an iPad mini and I also have a Mac computer, and I just use the Apple Books function that is actually, I think it's already built into your iPad. You just have to look for the book icon and it can come down right to there. So I know that sometimes the library e-readers are I found the one that for our public library, they're complicated and I think they're linked specifically to public libraries. But if you go for whatever your generic book function, it should not be a problem at all for you to do it that way.
So if I go, I just went to the title, there's like a Kindle download. And so you select it and then you get a link from SABR. Is that right, Bill?
I don't know, because I don't have an e-reader. I just use the PDF when I download stuff.
Yeah.
I don't,
well, so you can
I guess
also
I can
download
jump in
this
on
as
that.
PDF.
Yeah, I just do it that way, but.
Yeah, because I always use the EPUB option and exactly what Sharon was saying, because I have a Mac and my iPad as well. So it's seamless between the two, but maybe that's just a plug for Apple. I don't know.
well, that's fine because I have I read on my iPad that's where I read usually. So try the Apple book download.
Yeah, I think what the choice, what Bill just said, I think the choice shows up as EPUB, but if you want, you can, I'm at livesliterary@gmail.com. If you want, you could even just email me and I could walk you through it, because honestly, there are books that I still need to download from the SABR library and we could even just do it together, because I don't remember it being complicated at all. It'll just be a matter of, once you've downloaded it, where to find it. And that's when there should be an Apple reader icon that's already on your Apple somewhere, but I think that comes with your Mac. So you honestly, you shouldn't need to download anything but the book.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. It's livesliterary@gmail.
That's right. livesliterary@gmail.com. Yeah, you can just email me and we could do it together.
All right, thank you. I'll try it on my own and then I'll write you a thank you note when it works.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. And actually, Ryan commented the offenses on May 20th are always keyed up to celebrate Hal Newhouser's birthday.
Oh, certainly.
So, perfect. All right. Well, if you don't have any questions, we can just unmute ourselves and break down into general baseball talk. I'm thinking we could probably, with this group, discuss the Tony La Russa manager situation. I'm going to run away and hide and let everybody else handle that.
Well, Bill, if you can't tell, that's what I'm dressed as. As you can see, I've been coming up with an incoherent argument for this whole meeting. So, and I've got the 80s hat on, so that fits. I'm a La Russa.
I was going to say, you went 83 for that.
That's a pretty scary Halloween costume, Richard.
Yes.
So who's in favor of it? Who is anti La Russa?
Why, Richard?
I mean, I could go into a lot of reasons, but I think my biggest concern more than anything is that at some point it will become about La Russa's legacy, not about the team. The team should be first, not La Russa. I keep wondering, is he going to be sitting there going, it's halfway through the season, it's not going as well as we should. Oh, I don't like these young guys, we should bench them. Or I'm not going to stay around 5 years, so I want to trade these young guys for veterans so we can win this year. And if there's any argument from the front office, from Han, he can always say, oh, I'll just call Jerry and go over your head. I don't like that situation. I don't like the fact that he, even his comments this year seem he's just not amenable to the clubhouse culture they built, where, it's like, it's loose, it's friendly, it's not, it's not this strict, we got to follow sportsmanship and baseball rules, enable them to play. And so I think there's going to be a clash there too. I don't like the looks of it.
I'm afraid you're right. It's it's already about LaRusso's legacy because they passed up the chance to possibly get AJ Hinch.
Do you have any reason to think Hinch was available? His mind seemed to be pretty made up already.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, because it seemed like the whole Tiger situation happened immediately. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess my concern, I guess full disclosure, I'm a Cubs fan, but I think the White Sox have been exciting recently to follow. And it just seems like it'd be a shame if that were to blow up on them for exactly the reasons that Richard mentioned. You know, because one of my concerns, I mean, you sort of referenced the unwritten rules of baseball, and that seems to be the book that LaRussa uses.
Yeah.
And there were so many instances of, you know, when he was with St. Louis, of you kind of getting into those revenge hitting batters constantly, a little beanball war between the two teams, where I just would hate to see somebody like Anderson or Moncada or Eloy suffer from that and you know, turn into an injury or just getting out of control based off of kind of the old school way of doing it. So.
Well, my observation at this point is the decision is made. I mean, there's no point arguing over who you wanted. The decision is made. Somehow we have to support the situation. And to your comment, Richard, the media has to help. I know Dan Bernstein has just railed on them relentlessly every day since they announced them. And if that's the way it's going to be all season long, that's going to really hurt. I mean, they got to give them a chance, or it could get very ugly if they wanted to.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bernstein. I mean, he's obviously very anti that move. Lawrence Holmes on The Score as well mentioned that he feels very distant from his team. And he said that hurts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of people on The Score were against it. I mean, you know, there are some positives, LaRussa. This is like, one of the things that happened, I sent out a message protesting this, and on my email distribution list was Chris Kampka, and he immediately mentioned, whatever this is, it's not as bad a hiring as Ventura. And I was like, yes, I agree with that. I mean, LaRussa is smart. He speaks Spanish. I mean, other people are worried about the analytics. I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, he was an early adapter of applying analytics to, I mean, I think he's open, he'll figure that out. I'm not worried about that at all. And, you know, the guy has won a lot of games. Hell, I was at his Hall of Fame induction ceremony, you know, so, I mean, it's not, no, I mean, they could have done a lot worse, but I think they could have done better, and not necessarily Hinch. I wasn't necessarily like, oh my God, you got to hit Hinch. But I think there were a lot of exciting candidates out there. And one of the things they said was even, you know, they went through no process. This was like a fait accompli. One of the things taking advantage of an open position like this to do is you bring in players from as many teams as possible to interview and pick their brain and get free scouting reports on what the other teams are doing. And they might accidentally leak, oh, this is the areas we're investigating. So you get free info on other teams, and nothing like this took place. This was just like, you know, they almost talked to him and almost nobody else. So there was like a great opportunity lost here. I mean, personally, I wouldn't have minded seeing Sandy Alomar come here. You know, he's got all the credentials I think Hinch does, and you don't have the baggage. So.
Yeah. Plus the White Sox, when they made the decision with Renteria, instantly said the person who will be managing this team has won recently.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. I mean, that's just factually wrong at this point. So.
No, I mean, the notion that 10 years ago is recent is not true. The game's changed a ton.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different game.
It's really unfortunate. It's unfortunate that Renteria has been shoved aside twice on both sides of town.
Yep.
Once for Joe Madden and once for Tony.
Yep.
And Joe Madden, I could at least see being a proven winner, and the club was ready to win. But Garusa doesn't make sense to me. I'm thrilled to see him back in the game, but it just doesn't make any sense. He's been up in the front office. There's a whole disconnect between upstairs and downstairs that he doesn't quite understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, to Rich's point, let's do the hires too. I think that could make a difference too.
Right.
In terms of, if he ends up delegating a lot of responsibility and he has good people under him, that could take care of a lot of stuff right there. But I don't know. I mean, I think Renteria was a better manager than people give him credit for. I mean, obviously, tactically, yes, he did need to move eventually, but I'm still not entirely sold that the Sox are out of the development phase. And Renteria was great at the development phase in giving players confidence and building them up and letting them be themselves. And just that had a lot to do with them surprising us this year. Just being relaxed, not being under pressure, and just kind of, and yeah, okay, so tactically he made a mistake in maybe, game 3, but honest to God, given the resources the Sox had, I defy anybody here to come up with a magic combination of the pitchers they had available that would have somehow magically gotten through that game. That was the cards that Hahn had dealt with it, dealt him. It's like, these are the pitchers you got to work with. Guess what? You get to try to navigate through this game, with here's Joe Arson squad here. Here's put Kindle on the fire here. Make your choice.
You get 15 pitches, you get 30 pitches. We'll get through this game.
Jesus, that young guy had been reliable all year. Who knew that when you throw him in that game, he just refused to throw a strike? Absolutely. The plate is there. The plate is not over there. Throw it, even if you have to throw it down the middle, get the ball over the plate. He wouldn't do it. Stubborn.
Does Renteria get some blame for not having developed the pitching staff any better than that by the time that we got to the playoffs?
Well, I mean, he developed some of the pitching staff, but I mean,
not enough.
Yeah, maybe not enough. And some of it, like they said, I think the one thing I do blame Renteria for doing is I thought, for better or worse, all year they had used Dylan Cease as the number 3 starter. And then it comes to the playoffs and they just bail on it. And I would have reverted to just saying, okay, let's try. You've done this all year. It's clear Cease needs fixing. Everybody's noticed in his mechanics. He throws straight pitches. He needs to develop. He's got the skills. He needs to develop. That's off season. That's something you can't fix in season. He's going to need a reboot during the off season. But for the moment, that may have been the best thing to do. But outside of that,
Cease had that rough start at the end of the year. Was it Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Well, what do you want to ask about the Cubs? Lester, and what other free agent moves do they make?
Yeah. I mean, Bill, you would know. Do the Cubs know it's okay to score more than one run in a playoff game? I'm thinking, do they get issued rules that say once you get to 1, you have to stop?
Well,
confuses me
that,
about
that certainly seemed to be the practice. Well, it was really funny because, obviously working from home, I was able to kind of go back and forth to the TV and watch that series. And Darvish had that great start in that game. And when he gave up that 1 home run, I just kind of squirmed up. And my wife asked, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well, the Cubs can't win now.
Yeah,
they're already down 1-0. They won't come back."
Was that the game where Darvish had 6 perfect innings almost,
or close to it?
Yeah.
Close to it. But it was just a solo bomb that bounced in the bleachers, and I was just like, it ended today.
5 and a third
tomorrow.
5 and a third perfect against Milwaukee, and I think it was Orlando Arcia that got him. So yeah, it really seemed kind of weird how the Cubs were kind of like the anti-Tampa Bay. Let's lean on our starters and don't go to the bullpen. as much as we need to. So
yeah, but I mean, it's, one thing I will say is, and this sort of relates to Tampa Bay in the World Series game, where it's like, there's only so much you can do with one run. Like, I don't feel like Kevin Cash has gone to the bullpen all year in the World Series, and then, it's like he gets blamed for doing what they've done all year with the starters he used for. And there was no way Snell was completing the game. They were going to have to go to the bullpen at some point. And like, it's kind of like, this was a game the Dodgers were punting. It was the Dodgers bullpen game, which is not as good as Tampa's bullpen. This was your opportunity to win, and the opportunity to win involves scoring more runs. And I felt with the Cubs against the Marlins, it was the same thing. I can't put this on any of the pitchers or on any of the managing decisions late in the game, because if your team doesn't score, it doesn't make a difference. Your offense has to do its share. It has to contribute. And I still think it's what I've said to Bill. They've been given some kind of side instructions that none of us know about that say you can't score more than one run. I think if anybody saw that, all Cub fans would be, oh, that explains it. You'd believe it. It's been going on for years.
Well, my desktop picture at work is from that final game of Wilson Contreras diving into home plate and getting tagged out. And I was just like, he almost scored.
Oh, yeah.
It was just a perfect shot. I'm like,
yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
What effect did the shortened season have on pitching and offense? Because I felt like I was watching a different game all season. It wasn't just the crowd. It was just like we were going into October, and it still felt like June or something. Mentally, it just was not. It didn't feel like the same game. And I think it goes back to what Richard was saying about developing hitters and pitchers, and it just didn't seem like there needed to be more developing time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a strange year overall. I mean, my wife's a Brewers fan, so we end up seeing a lot of their games. And Christian Yelich was a non-factor, and he's an MVP and one of the best in the league, and he was just misfired all year.
Well, I mean, that's a great example. Yelich, and I'd even say Baez are cases of where in a normal season, 60 games, I don't want to say it's nothing, but you can still recover. You can, in a normal season, even a bad start like this for them for 60 games, if they play the whole season, you could find that by the end of the season, their stats have somewhat recovered. They discover their swing, they do that. And I think that's what's distorting. Going forward for the Cubs, everybody wants it's almost like there's this desire to sell low, and I always buy high. My one strategy for the Cubs is try to get Baez signed for an extension, because I don't think what you saw in 60 games was the player he is. And whatever that can buy you in terms of a lower contract, just do it. Just go out there, get him signed, and then you'll be thankful when he's back to what he was next year.
Sure. Well, one of the comments about Baez that was floating around was maybe he's one of those players who actually needs the crowd.
Yeah.
He kind of understands that he's an entertainer. Yeah. And it sort of elevates his game, knowing people are actually in the seats watching him. And I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's possible.
There's an interesting correlation with his worst season being missed.
And the comment he made about the video, I think he got really bad for that. The video access that he didn't have access to, I think it affected a lot of hitters.
I think it did.
Yeah.
That I think may have been bigger actually than the crowd thing.
Yes, I agree.
Because once again, it's a norm they've been used to all their life, and now all of a sudden that's taken away, where you can't just sort of on the fly fix what's going on. Yeah, that's.
what do you guys think about the Marquee Network? Those of us who were able to watch the Cubs channel that were in market.
It's hard to tell. I mean, I think it's everything was so unusual about this season.
But do you think
I think it's hard to judge it.
You think it's a good you think it's a good thing for Cubs baseball though to have all games in market on one channel just like it was on GN? That was my takeaway.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly a different experience overall, always knowing, well, I mean, living in the Chicagoland area with Comcast, I didn't get it until the day before the season started. My dad's actually on this call and he had it before me.
Well,
and he kept joking with me. He's just like, you have it? I have it. I'm watching some of this stuff. I'm like, I don't have it. So.
I live just on the edge of the Indianapolis market. And so I was very happy. In fact, I started crying when I found out that my cable system Comcast had that in the area entire opening day. It was a game changer the way I followed games and stuff. So I don't know. It gave me some excitement in a new season that was just kind of not normal, and it kind of lifted my spirits a little bit as to what they could do going forward. I agree with you. It's too early to tell what exactly they're gonna do. So, and I seem to have noticed all these non-tenders that players or teams are making about Brett Hand and stuff. Go ahead and comment, Richard.
Yeah, just Brett Hand, Colton Wong. There's going to be a ton of them. It's going to be a buyer's market. I think what's weird is because of the team's finances, you're going to have so many players released that it will be a buyer's market and there won't be a lot of buyers. And so, I keep thinking that, there might be some team that just decides, okay, we're going to go for it. And they're going to have to pick a litter. They're going to step in there. And somebody this morning suggested an obvious candidate for that. The Mets just got sold. And the owner hasn't been impacted at all by losing money this year in baseball. He may want to make a splash. He may just go through all those non-tenders and say, okay, what second baseman do I want? Boom. Because he'll be able to give them more than they get anywhere else. And it's still a lot less than what they're worth. You may find that the Mets are in great position in 2020 just because they're able to pick up 6, 7, 8 players on the market just because, they're there. They're solid players and the other teams are hesitant to sign them. It's going to be an interesting offseason because I think there's going to be a lot of non-movement, but you're going to see 1 or 2 teams who just say, yes, we are doing it. And that's going to be intriguing.
I'd like to ask about the way the World Series ended. I know we've got a longtime Dodger watcher on the call, Don Zaminda. What's happening with Bill Turner and the team being?
Well, Turner's really gotten a lot of grief for what he did after the game. I just think that was so stupid and selfish on his part. He came out to post for a picture. He's standing right next to his manager, who has a heart condition. He has Kenley Jansen on the team who has a heart condition. It was just so ridiculous. And what's terrible about it is that he's a tremendously popular player.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's a wonderful guy. Everybody loves him. All he had to do was just sit that out and the whole situation would have been different. But he's gotten so much grief for this that it's really kind of tainted the celebration in Los Angeles about it. And it's just so unfortunate and so unnecessary too.
Yeah, I guess I don't think this could be the case.
Positive.
Yeah, I have not heard yet from that, but I guess maybe, and I don't see this as being really possible, but do you think he did that not knowing that they had just announced on the broadcast why he was pulled, and he thought maybe everybody thought it would be just a little injury and he'll run out really quickly, take his photos, celebrate. But the fact that the game had ended and then they just made that announcement on the broadcast and then you see him out on the field.
No, he was told, and he was aware of it. And in fact, MLB people were there and tried to get him off the field, and he wouldn't get off.
Yeah.
So he's got to shoulder the whole blame for this.
From the descriptions, it sounded like they pretty energetically tried to keep him off.
They did,
field.
yes, they did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a pity because it distracts from what was a pretty good World Series, all things considered. I mean, I mean, I'll give the Dodgers credit for something nobody's really talked about, but because I had a discussion about this with a friend earlier in the year, how if you think about the great screw-ups in World Series history, the memorable mess-ups, and whether it be that drop third strike in 41 with Gianfredo or Snodgrass dropping the fly ball in the 1912 World Series, or there's a zillion things like that are memorable that the team that commits the mistake, never recovers from. And yet the Dodgers somehow came back from a play that was equally as ridiculous as any of those, and without batting an eye won the World Series, because that ending to, Game 4 was just, that was just insane. That was memorably insane. That was the play of the year. I voted for that as yes, that was the play of the year. But I just wow. And they, without batting an eye, it's oh, okay, well, we've got better players. We'll just win the next games. That's hard to do psychologically.
I think Richard's going to write that game summary for you, Bill.
Is the Rose Arena a fluke? Will he continue to succeed in 2021? I'm not completely sold on that. Small sample size theater.
Well, we'll see. I mean, now they'll get the video on him. We've seen, that guy, remember the guy last year on the Reds? What was his,
Aquino, Aristide Aquino. Good point.
He's still a good hitter, but he's not what he was as when he first came up with the Reds. It's okay, they figured out some stuff of how to pitch to him. And I think it may just be like that. It's scouting. I've seen a zillion players like that. I remember when this first started coming out, Gordon Beckham's rookie year with the White Sox, where he had this spectacular rookie year, and you thought, wow, this is really going to be a good hitter. And then in the fall, they were doing all these heat zones where it was well, it turns out most of Gordon Beckham's extra base hits were in, of the strike zone, were in this part of the strike zone, a very small part of the strike zone. That's where he got all his extra base hits from. And all I can think of is the old doctor joke, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, stop doing that. And it's well, gee, if that's where he hits, don't throw it there. And sure enough, he wasn't getting pitches there anymore. And I think a Rose Arena, they will dissect it. They've got a lot of footage on him. We'll see how he does next year.
I wonder if the same thing will happen to Rose Arena that happened to Ian Happ the second half of this past year.
Possibly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, he'll have to adjust. I mean, the game's always a game of adjustments.
Oh, sure.
We'll see, if he can come back. Although Happ has an excuse. Happ wasn't he hit in the head, or at some point he wasn't quite the same player after that?
Yes, he actually
was.
Yeah,
he was.
Yeah. Or I think hit just below the eye.
Yeah, I mean, but something like that, it can shake you up for a while.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Wow, this almost felt like one of our in-person meetings at the end.
Yeah.
It's like the good old days.
Why was that?
Oh, we missed those.
Yeah.
You mean just the back and forth?
Oh, just the back and forth, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I guess we actually had a season to finally watch, or at least a portion of it.
Figure out when we can next, I'm realizing, because they were talking about it this morning, that it right now scheduled for August of 2021 is the National Sports Cards Collectors Show, which, I mean, that may be about the dividing line for maybe by that time you can start having public meetings again. So I'm wondering if is that when it is?
Yeah.
Because I mean, because that's the first time in a while where somebody was talking about a meeting that I thought, okay, it's not definite that meeting's going to be canceled. Mm-hmm. That one you could at least envision as being possible, that maybe there will be enough vaccines out by that time where it's like, okay, it's starting to finally go down. That,
well, we thought the same thing about SABR Day 2021. That's not going to happen.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping the SABR convention. I hope we could go to Baltimore next year.
I wanted to ask Don about how he feels about being a Dodger fan and winning this year, even though it's a 60-game season and all the stuff that's going on. I was just wondering because I was thinking, what if the Cubs do one? How would I feel? It would certainly feel different for me.
Well, I think out here, nobody really cares that it was a short season. They've been struggling for so long, and they've really had, if not the best, one of the best teams in baseball for close to a decade.
Sure.
And they've had so much postseason disappointment. And it got to the extent where people were talking about firing Dave Roberts, which I thought would have been ridiculous if they hadn't won this series. So there's a tremendous sense of relief and a great feeling, because one thing about this team is that it's a really likable team. I mean, most of the guys on the team are good guys. They're very well respected. There's nobody that's really thought ill of. I mean, the thing with Turner, that was unfortunate, but as a person, he's certainly highly regarded. And I have to say about Dave Roberts is that he's such a beloved manager and so highly respected by his players and really by almost everybody in the city. I was just so happy that he finally broke through and won the World Series.
Because I was beginning to feel like this era Dodgers might be remembered by the 90s Braves. You know, great team, probably the best team, but they got that one title.
Yeah, well,
you know,
if this is the only one that could happen.
I know.
Yeah, it's no, I was happy Kershaw also got, had a good series, so we don't have to hear about that anymore, about him being a choke artist. Because one thing I always remember about Kershaw early on, they kept saying, oh, look how he choked in these games. And you'd look through a lot of those games and they were starts where, I mean, I swear there was one game against the Cardinals where he blew up in the 7th inning, and that was after pitching 6 perfect innings. It was just like, they were just trying to, they wouldn't pull him out. It's just like he's lost it, and they don't. So his ERA gets inflated because of stuff like that.
Yeah, and they used him on short rest. They used him in relief. They really asked too much of him.
Yeah.
And they finally got smart this year in particular, and it really worked out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you look at Game 7 of 2016 against the Cubs. I think if Kershaw hadn't, if they go to somebody else instead of Kershaw, a tired Kershaw, the Dodgers have a better chance of beating the Cubs in Game 6.
Yeah,
I'm happy with that result, though.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, it tells you how big that last game and how important it was for the Cubs to win Game 5 in Los Angeles. I mean, that was.
Yeah.
I mean, in a weird way, that was that series.
Yeah.
Really true.
But no, I mean, the Dodgers, I mean, the one thing about this year is I don't think it's kind of weird the way it's worked out in baseball when you've had these big interruptions or shortened seasons historically. It seems that the teams have won. Nobody's doubted they've been legit. That it just feels right. Like 1918, the Red Sox won, who, were had won world champions. You look at, during the World War II years, some of those seasons or where players are gone, who's winning? The Cardinals are winning, which was a top franchise then. The Yankees are winning. It's just like nobody really thinks of those as tainted. And this just fits right in. Okay, the Dodgers had the great organization, so they win in 2020, long after COVID's forgotten, nobody's going to look at that and go oh, that's an outlier, or that's due to a weird season. That just feels like, yeah, that was one of the top teams. You had 2 of the best teams playing each other. It doesn't seem off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I was really hoping the Astros didn't do it, because then you kind of get that stigma of that team with a losing record winning the pennant. You know, yeah. So I think you ended up exactly what you're saying. I think history will remember this.
I would have loved to have seen Bill what Tampa Bay and Houston would have done over a whole season. I'm not sure if maybe the Yankees come back. Do the Cubs hang on in the Central? What becomes of that whole division? It could run completely different. There's so many unanswered questions that we'll never know the answer to. And I disagree with Richard. I don't think we'll ever forget this season. I don't think we'll look at it like 81. It's like, oh, it's a weird season. So maybe the whole championship thing might be a little discredited by some people, but what's history is history, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, 81, it was the World Series in 81 was Yankees and Dodgers, and okay, the Dodgers won, but we had seen that before. As close as those other series were, I don't know if anybody would have been surprised if the Dodgers won in 77 or 78. So I didn't, 81 is another example of that didn't feel off in terms of baseball history.
Well, I tell you, it felt off in the Midwest because Cincinnati had the best record overall in 81, and they were split off into two halves, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. Explain to me how that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think the big difference with this particular season and just the issue of how history remember it wasn't labor. It wasn't labor. It wasn't 1918 World War I cutting the season a little bit short. It was something radically different. And I think that's a case of where I think history will understand that it wasn't some sinister, labor issue. It was something very different.
Yeah.
And everybody played 60. You didn't have like the 81 split season of like a great team just fell through the cracks. I think it'll be different.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, I'll give Ryan this. I agree on this compared to 81. I would say you might agree this is more legit than 81 just on this principle. This year, everybody knew the rules going in. Everybody knew, okay, you're only playing within your division, and it played out that way, except for all but one game in baseball was played. Everybody had the rules beforehand. 81, maybe the Reds, if they know that specifically, they have to win that division in the first, in that sense, they, maybe they approach it differently or something. If they know that coming up that it's going to be a split season, in that sense, you didn't know, because nobody had an idea that the teams that were in first place when the strike occurred were in the playoffs. Nobody knew that. So the rules changed halfway through the season.
But
I'll give you that.
But the rules also changed. The rules also changed during this season because of the seven inning doubleheader and the man on second base, and
but it was all before the season, though.
Well,
season, it going in.
The 7 inning doubleheaders though were mandated during the season. Oh, they were actually started during the season to make up the COVID games the Marlins missed. So I think that is actually a similarity rather than a difference.
Yeah. Actually, oddly enough, it just dawned on me. What's the common ending of 81 and 2020?
Dodgers.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. Oh well. I guess we can wrap this up if unless anybody
wraps this up.
My only other comment is that going into the season, I think the Dodgers were still the heavy favorites. Yeah. Going into the NBA season, if you were forced to pick one team, the Lakers would be the heavy favorites. going into the NHL season, easily among the top favorites, if not the favorite, was the Tampa Bay Lightning. So maybe what we're saying is, if you've got to bet this season for the NFL, go with the Chiefs.
Right.
Because it's a chalk year. Apparently, when disruptions occur, chalk takes over.
Bill, I'd like to thank you for organizing this get together.
Thank you so much. Yes.
It was a
About
blast.
doing another one, or maybe have Don join us.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think it'd be great.
We owe you one.
We do.
That's right.
Yours was the first one that we unfortunately had to cancel at the last minute. So yeah. So you are on our list. We will be talking after this.
I'm ready.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. It was a blast.
I'll get you that newsletter article this weekend. It's pretty simple. It's just like an event announcement, but it links to Chicago baseball history sites. That
makes sense. Makes sense.
Doing.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill Nolan. Good to see you.
Every Bill on here.
Bye.